Home stretch. Macrocytic anemias, as you can guess, has to do with anemia where the red blood cells are too large. This falls into two further categories, megaloblastic and non-megaloblastic. So megaloblastic, really, I guess there's two things. So the reason that the cells are getting larger in this case is because there's abnormal DNA synthesis. So that's one thing to know. So if there's not appropriate DNA synthesis, they can't divide as much as they should. And it's every time a red blood cell precursor divides, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's ready to go. It's a fully mature red blood cell, and then it gets pushed out. But if they don't have enough of the DNA precursors, they can't do synthesis, they can't do replication, and so that makes them too large. So that is a feature of megaloblastic, despite the fact that the non-megaloblastic is also large, but it's not anything to do with DNA synthesis. And then two is they have these hypersegmented neutrophils. This is really for the same reason. The neutrophils or precursors also have issues with cell division. So a normal neutrophil should have this like characteristic three-lobed nucleus. And in this case, this is the not normal megaloblastic one. There's like 9 different lobes of the nucleus there. So if you see hypersegmented neutrophil, boom, bingo, this is megaloblastic. That has to do with the DNA synthesis. Not a lot to say about the non-megaloblastic. Again, just normal neutrophils and nothing to do with DNA synthesis. These are going to be less common than the megaloblastic ones. So probably the main way you're going to have a megaloblastic macrocytic anemia is if you have a folate, B9, or cobalamin B12 deficiency. And again, I told you guys, you're never going to escape this particular image, this slide. This is going to come forever. So how is this working? Folic acid is necessary to generate 5,10-methylene THF, which is really just going to give a methyl to a uracil, which turns it into a thymine. In other words, you need folate to make purines, and you need purines to do division, and you need division to become a smaller red blood cell that's mature. And if you don't do that, you're going to be a large megaloblastic red blood cell. On the other hand, if I don't have B12, you know what? It's the exact same story. I'm going to have diminished purine synthesis. So differentiating these two, I think, is going to be important. So B12 also plays a role in the conversion of methylmalonic acid to succinyl-CoA. So if I have a B9 deficiency, B9 is folate. So if I have a B9 deficiency, I'm only going to have homocysteine levels up. So note that if I didn't have B9, I would not be able to do this reaction, which means I would not be able to convert homocysteine to methionine, which is why homocysteine is just going to build up. So homocysteine levels are higher, but it has nothing to do with this reaction over here. So only homocysteine levels are up. On the other hand, if we have a B12 deficiency, well, if I have a B12 deficiency over here, it's the same thing. My homocysteine levels are going to go up because I cannot convert it into methionine. But B12 we're seeing also has a role over here. We cannot generate succinyl-CoA, which means the methylmalonic levels will go up. So for B12 deficiency, you are going to have both homocysteine and methylmalonic acid build up. So it's an important way that they might differentiate the two. Actually, we'll come back to orotic acid in a second. Let's just talk a little bit more about B9 and B12. So B12, a lot of people think, so let's say that you were a vegetarian or a vegan. Maybe you would have a harder time getting B12 into your body. Well, your body has way more stores. You have tons of B12 stores for years. You would have to be a vegetarian and vegan for years, not take a single supplement, and just eat very, very specific types of vegan pancakes, and then maybe eventually your B12 would go down and you might become anemic, megaloblastic anemic specifically. If it's a diet issue, it's more likely that it would be a B9. B9 is going to be griefy. It's very late here. It's going to be leafy green vegetables, and that might run out in a couple of weeks. So B12, you have years of stores. B9, you only have a couple of weeks of stores. So could be B9 due to a poor diet. More than likely, if it's B12, it's something called pernicious anemia. So you guys might recall from the MCAT, you have parietal cells in your stomach, which generate hydrochloric acid, but they also produce something called intrinsic factor. When you take in B12, B12 itself is not very easily absorbed in the duodenum. It has to be complexed to intrinsic factor produced by the parietal cells in the stomach, and then it can go and be absorbed into your through your duodenum, only with the intrinsic factor. But pernicious anemia is you have autoimmune attack of these parietal cells, which destroys the intrinsic factor, which means the B12 will not be absorbed. Alternatively, maybe you have celiac disease. Maybe you had a gastric bypass and you're bypassing your duodenum. There could be various other reasons why you're having difficult with absorption, but probably the most likely is the B12 pernicious anemia reason. All right, so for a very similar reason, erotic aciduria is going to cause megaloblastic anemia. So this is the purine synthesis pathway. And notice that one of these steps is orotic acid being converted to uracil monophosphate. And you need uracil monophosphate synthase. But if you have a deficiency in this enzyme, you cannot generate this. And if you can't generate this, you have a hard time generating your thymine. And this is going to be really a very similar clinical presentation as not having enough folate, not having enough B12. Many chemotherapy drugs also, their role is to either stop the pyrimidine or the purine pathway. So any of these drugs would do a very similar thing. And so for the non-megaloblastic anemias, the DNA synthesis is normal, but the red blood cells are still big. The two big ones to know are the liver disease and alcoholism that might cause this. And if you couldn't tell, I'm pretty tired and I kind of pooped out. So this last slide is me giving up. This is I'm tired. I'm going to bed. So I hope this was helpful. And good luck to everybody on the test.